She was the kind of woman people pointed to as an example of goodness. In her village, her name was synonymous with generosity, discipline, and unwavering faith. She attended church regularly, donated to the poor, and always carried a serene smile that inspired trust. To neighbors, she was a model Christian. To friends, she was a source of comfort. To the world, she was everything a virtuous woman should be. But beneath this carefully polished surface, another life existed, one she hid so deeply that even those closest to her would never have suspected its presence. When she walked the streets, people saw a saint. When she went home behind closed doors, she slipped into a different identity entirely, ruled not by virtue but by temptation, manipulation, and hidden desires. Her double life was not born overnight. It had grown slowly, like a vine curling around her soul, squeezing tighter with every secret she kept. Eventually, the weight of her hidden actions began to suffocate her spirit. She felt an emptiness growing inside her, a silent fear that her mask would someday crack. That fear drove her to Padre Pio. She approached him not because she intended to confess everything, but because she hoped for relief, a light blessing, a comforting word, anything to quiet the storm inside her without revealing its cause. Padre Pio welcomed her kindly, but she felt a strange unease as he looked at her with eyes that seemed to see far past the surface, into the corners of her soul she thought were locked away. She tried to speak, but every word felt heavy, twisted, and incomplete. For the first time in her life, she sensed that someone knew there was another version of her, one the world had never seen, but God had watched all along. When the woman finally sat before Padre Pio in the confessional, she expected the usual routine, a gentle prayer, a few questions, and the comforting assurance of God's forgiveness. Instead, she felt a strange heaviness settle around her, as though the very air inside the chapel had thickened. Padre Pio lowered his head for a moment, as if silently listening to something beyond human ears. Then he lifted his gaze, and his eyes met hers with a depth she had never encountered before. It was not a look of accusation, nor one of anger. It was a look of recognition, as if he were seeing not the woman she pretended to be, but the one she desperately tried to hide. She felt exposed, stripped of every false virtue she had built her life upon. Her heart pounded, her hands trembled, and every secret she had buried seemed to rise to the surface under his quiet, searching gaze. She tried to speak, shaping her words carefully, offering only the safe sins, the small mistakes that kept her public image intact. But Padre Pio did not nod as usual. Instead, he closed his eyes, and a deep sorrow crossed his face. For a long moment, he remained silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle, but firm, carrying the weight of truth. "My daughter," he said softly, "God sees the life you show the world, and the life you live in the dark. He sees both," her breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever come so close to unveiling her hidden world. She felt both terrified and strangely relieved, as though a door she had locked long ago had just been opened by someone who understood. In that moment, she realized Padre Pio wasn't judging her. He was inviting her to step out of the shadows she had lived in for far too long. As the woman sat trembling, Padre Pio's expression grew more solemn, as though he were witnessing something unfolding beyond the boundaries of the physical world. She could feel his silence pressing against her conscience, urging her to speak, to confess, to step into the light. But decades of carefully crafted deception held her tongue captive. She had mastered the art of pretending, of splitting herself into two worlds, one for God and one for her hidden desires. Even now, faced with a saint, she clung to the hope that her secrets would remain buried. But Padre Pio began to describe things she had never spoken aloud. He spoke of a relationship she had hidden for years, one that contradicted every virtue she claimed to uphold. He mentioned the lies she had woven like threads into every corner of her life, the manipulations she used to keep people believing she was a model of goodness. He described moments she thought no one had seen. Actions done in shadows, choices rooted in pride, vanity, and fear. Her heart froze. Each word felt like a mirror being lifted before her, reflecting a version of herself she had never wanted to confront. Tears welled in her eyes, not from shame alone, but from the shock of realizing that God had witnessed everything she had tried so hard to hide. Padre Pio did not raise his voice. He did not condemn her. Instead, he spoke with a sorrow that pierced deeper than any harsh rebuke could have. It was the sorrow of seeing a soul divided, living two realities, unable to reconcile either with God. "You have lived one life for people," he said gently, "and another life for yourself. But only one will follow you into eternity." Her breath shuddered. For the first time, she felt the full weight of her double life, not as a clever escape, but as a chain tightening around her soul. The chapel grew painfully silent as Padre Pio's words settled over her like a heavy cloak. She felt as though the walls themselves were listening, waiting to see what she would do next. Inside her heart, two worlds collided: the desire to finally confess and be free, and the overwhelming fear of being truly known, truly exposed. Confession meant surrender. Confession meant admitting she had built her entire life on a fragile illusion. For several moments, she could not breathe. Her mind raced back through the years, the lies she had told without blinking, the nights she lived in ways that contradicted the holy image she carefully maintained, the secrets she had justified again and again. She had always told herself that God understood, that God would forgive her even if she never admitted the truth. But now, sitting before a man who saw directly into her soul, she realized she had only been comforting herself with excuses. Padre Pio leaned forward slightly, his voice soft but steady. "The mercy of God is wide, my daughter, but it cannot enter a heart that remains closed." Those words struck deeper than anything he had revealed about her past. She realized that the barrier between her and God was not her sin. It was her refusal to let go of her double life. She wanted forgiveness without transformation, absolution without honesty. And now, that contradiction stood before her like a wall she could no longer ignore. She opened her mouth, trying to speak, but no sound came. Shame tightened her throat. Fear paralyzed her. Everything inside her urged her to confess, yet the image she had built for so long clung to her like a second skin. Padre Pio watched her with compassion, not judgment, as if he were witnessing a soul wrestling for its freedom. And in that struggle, she realized the truth. Hiding her sins had cost her far more than confessing them ever would. When the woman finally rose from the confessional, she walked slowly, as though carrying a weight far heavier than her body could bear. Padre Pio had revealed the truth with clarity and compassion, but the choice, the final step toward freedom, still belonged to her. She left the chapel with tears in her eyes, but not the tears of someone transformed. They were the tears of someone torn between two worlds and unable to choose. Days later, word reached Padre Pio that the woman had died suddenly. And in that moment, he was granted a painful vision, one he would never forget. He saw her soul standing before eternity, still divided, still burdened by the life she hid. She was not condemned for her sins alone, but for refusing the mercy she was offered when she needed it most. Her soul did not appear angry or rebellious. Instead, it looked sorrowful, deeply, eternally sorrowful, carrying the regret of a truth never spoken and a forgiveness never received. She understood too late that God had been ready to heal her completely. But she had feared the light more than the darkness she lived in. Padre Pio prayed for her long after the vision faded. He prayed not out of despair, but out of hope that God's mercy reaches farther than human fear can ever travel. And he carried her memory as a reminder. It is not the sin that destroys the soul. It is the refusal to let grace enter where truth is hidden.